Raise your hand if you've ever had a pet. Any kind of pet. Great. Okay, put your hands down. That makes a lot of sense because according to the American Pet Products Association, 67% of Americans have some sort of pet. All right, another question. Now raise your hand if you've ever experienced a pet dying. Okay, that looks like almost everyone maybe who raised their hand before, which makes sense because if you are someone who loves pets, you know that the problem with pets is they just don't live as long as people do. All right, next question. When that pet died, raise your hand if you felt really sad and upset about that pet's death. Okay, seems like maybe everyone who experienced a pet dying had some feelings about it, right? It's really sad, and honestly, it does not get easier the older you get or the more pets you have. It's always sad when a pet dies. All right, last question. Put your hand up if you talked to anybody about those really sad feelings. Okay, not very many people. Which, remember how many people raised their hands first, right? What I want to talk about today is the fact that so many people have pets, and therefore so many people experience having those pets die. And even though pet loss is something that a lot of us have in common, for some reason we just don't talk about it a lot. And I think personally we should be talking about pet death all the time because it's better for our grieving practices, and also it is a great way to connect and bond with people. So I wrote this book, Good Grief on Loving Pets Here and Hereafter, which is all about the different things that people do when their pets die to mourn and remember them. I had the idea when I started my MFA program in creative writing in fall 2012. So I went into my MFA knowing I had another idea for my thesis, and it was this multi-generational family memoir about inherited trauma and anxiety. It was very uplifting to write. So when I needed a break from writing about that really heavy stuff, I found I was drawn to writing these short personal essays about pets I'd had, which makes a lot of sense. I've always turned to pets for companionship my whole life. I grew up a mostly only child. I have 3 siblings who are 10 to 15 years older than me, so I was by myself a lot, and pets really ended up being my first friends, honorary siblings. So my elementary school had all kinds of animals. There was iguanas, rabbits, hamsters, even a tarantula, and then at home I had fish, birds, turtles, dogs, you name it. And whenever I felt upset about anything, I would always turn to my animals for comfort. Because, you know, we can be our most private and personal versions of ourselves with our pets. I would sometimes feel awkward around kids in my class where I would bring up a book no one else had read, or I'd say I didn't want to play kickball and I maybe would get a weird look. But with my pets, they never did that. I would, be able to do a bad Australian accent for my dogs, or I would sing the lyrics to Jesus Christ Superstar, and they didn't care. My pets just loved me for me. So our relationships with animals is really, really special. We can be totally uninhibited around them. And also, you don't get embarrassed, right, if you step out of the shower and your dog catches you naked, right? Like, I think that pets are really an extension of ourselves. So the other thing too is that we can be physically affectionate with our pets in a way that we can't with a lot of other people, maybe with a parent or a spouse or a sibling. But pets often sleep in our beds, they snuggle with us on the couch at night. And there have been all these studies that show actually that petting dogs can help release serotonin and dopamine in our brains, which are 2 of the feel-good chemicals. And there was actually a study that discovered that staring into a dog's eyes releases oxytocin, which is the same love hormone that happens when parents look at a newborn baby. There was also a study actually that just watching fish swim around can lower your blood pressure. The other thing is also pets give us love totally judgment-free. Our relationships with other people can be really fraught and complicated. You can love someone, but you can also get mad at them, you can get frustrated with them. And when people die, it can be a whole mix of feelings. You can be really sad, you can also feel indifferent, you can feel angry. But I find that our relationships with pets are often much more pure and simple, and therefore when they die, it just makes us really, really sad. And the thing about pets too is you just know exactly where you stand with them no matter what. So one story, a friend of mine told me about her mom who had been estranged from her father, so my friend's grandfather, for a long time. And when the mom's father passed away, she honestly was not that sad. She had mourned that relationship a long time ago. But then about 6 months later, the mom's cat died. And she was absolutely devastated. But it made sense because she lived alone. It was just her and the cat. They ate all their meals together. They slept in the same bed every night. And losing that relationship was really, really painful for her. And I think this story just shows that you can't really actually know what someone's relationship is like with another being just based on the species or what the relationship says on paper. And there are a lot of people who are actually a lot closer to their pet family members than their human family members. So pets are really good for us for a lot of different reasons, and they brought me a lot of happiness and joy and comfort all throughout my childhood and high school and college years. So then it was pretty logical when I was feeling down in grad school that I would turn to pets as a way to comfort myself. But here's the thing. All those personal essays about pets I had had always ended with how those pets died. Because if you love animals, you know they just don't live as long as people do. So if you love a pet, eventually you're going to have to deal with that pet's death. And for all the reasons I just listed about why pets are so wonderful, that's also why it's so terrible when they die. So I was a little nervous, but I brought a few of those pieces that I was writing into my writing workshop in grad school. And one of them that I brought was about my betta fish, Wanda, who I had when I was a first year here at Wellesley College. The story of Wanda is that she contracted dropsy when I didn't clean her tank well enough, and I ended up having to euthanize her in a cup of vodka. So I shared this story, which I'd always felt really kind of guilty and sad about with my classmates, and I was shocked that then they were really empathetic, and they immediately started telling me about times that they had messed up caring for their own pets, or other times that they had had to make really hard decisions about euthanasia. And it was really interesting because I found in sharing Wanda's story, I both felt better about this long-term guilt I've been harboring about what had happened with her, but also I felt a lot closer to my classmates as well. And it was so crazy. They were really excited to share these often really depressing stories about pet death, but it was like they had been waiting for the right moment to be able to share them. And I get it, talking about feelings is really, really scary and hard. And in general, Americans are pretty adverse to talking about anything relating to death and grief. There was an informal poll on WebMD which said that 71% of Americans don't have a living will. And according to Ethos, which is a life insurance company, more than 2/3 of Americans say that discussing end-of-life matters is important, but only half say they've actually done it. So Americans, I think, really hate talking about death of any kind, but then especially if that death is related to a disenfranchised type of grief. So disenfranchised grief is any type of grief that stems from a loss that is not maybe as socially acceptable or widely discussed. So for example, someone might feel awkward if you bring up the fact that you're sad because your grandmother is dying, but they'll probably get it. They might have some experience with that themselves. But people can feel grief over all kinds of things, losing a job, having a miscarriage, moving, going through a divorce or a breakup, or having a pet die. But it's really hard when you're feeling upset about something that maybe isn't traditionally talked about to bring that up, because you don't know how someone else is going to react. You know, are they going to laugh at you? Are they going to be confused? Are they going to think you're overreacting? But here's the thing, I think your odds are pretty good because all kinds of people have pets. When I was writing my book, I interviewed all kinds of people. I talked to old, young, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, people of all races, socioeconomic backgrounds, gender, sexualities, all kinds of people. And everyone who had a pet had two things in common, which was the deep, deep love they felt for their animal, and then the deep grief they felt when that pet died. Losing a pet is such a common experience that so many of us share. There's actually 20,000 pets buried in the Pine Ridge Pet Cemetery down the street in Dedham alone. And there's over 700 pet cemeteries just in the United States. And there's hundreds and hundreds more all throughout the world. There's contemporary, ancient, Buddhist, Christian, atheist, all kinds of pet cemeteries. So pet loss is an experience that many of us share, and by openly speaking about our feelings around it, we can find other people who we can relate to, yet we often keep these feelings bottled up because we're so afraid of how other people might react. Which makes sense, not everyone has had a pet, and some people do see animals as being less than human. So 2 examples. One person I spoke with after my book was out told me that she had once asked her boss for the day off to be able to go home and be with her parents to euthanize her childhood cat, who was 18 years old. And her boss gave her the day, but told her it was really inappropriate that she asked. So I totally get if you don't want to bring up feeling sad about your pet dying, if you're afraid that's the reaction you could get. But then on the flip side, another friend who I interviewed for the book told me about how when she was recently graduated from college and she was living in Boston and kind of broke and found out her parents in South Dakota were going to have to euthanize her childhood cat, she really wanted to be able to go home but couldn't afford to do it. Happened to mention this sort of offhand to her boss, and he transferred all of his airline miles to her without even asking. He just gave them to her so she could go. So opening up is really scary, but when you do find someone who gets it, sharing can feel really good. And one thing that broke my heart over and over was when I interviewed people for my book, sometimes they would spend an hour or more telling me about a pet they'd loved and how upset they'd felt when this animal died. And so often they said, "I've never spoken about this to anyone else before." And I was just shocked. This major, really hard, difficult thing happened in your life, and you never talked about it with anyone until I came along asking nosy questions. And then not only that, often after people, cried and were really upset, sometimes they couldn't even articulate their feelings because they were so devastated sharing these stories, they always said at the end, "I'm really glad we talked about this." So sharing can be really risky and scary, but when we do open up, sometimes you can have a really special connection with another person. So a story from my own life. This was Gus, my childhood dog, and in fall 2006, when I was a first year here at Wellesley College, I knew that Gus wasn't doing great. He had this digestive tract disease that made it really hard for him to go to the bathroom and eat, and I kind of had a feeling this was coming. But my parents still, when they called me, I remember so clearly I was walking from the academic quad back to Claflin where I lived, and they called me and told me they were gonna have to euthanize Gus, and I sat down on the curb by the Davis Museum and started crying because I was so upset. But my parents asked if I wanted to come home to be there and be part of, his euthanasia. I said I did, and so they scheduled it for early the following week so I could have a couple days to, get things in order and come home. So the next day I went around and I found all my professors. I went to their classes or found them in office hours, and I told them what was going on and asked for permission to miss class. And everyone was very kind. Some people were a little bit awkward because, like I said, Americans can be very weird about talking about death. And honestly, I was really, really exhausted by the time I got to my last professor because it was just really draining to have to repeat over and over and explain this sad, hard thing I was going to have to do. So I went to meet with my final professor, who was my Russian 101 teacher, Professor Thomas Hodge. Some of you may know him. And I was sitting in his office, and I remember I was just staring at the books on his bookshelf behind him because I was like, I just have to get through this, and then I can go back to my dorm room and I can have a good cry. And I started to realize, though, that he wasn't giving me the regular standard response. Professor Hodge had started telling me then about his dog that he'd had right after college when he was in grad school, and she sat at his feet when he was researching his PhD. And then Professor Hodge started crying as he's telling me about this dog. And then I started crying, thinking about Gus. And then there are both of us just weeping together in the fourth floor of Founders, talking about our dead and soon to be dead dogs. And when I got back to my dorm room in Claflin, I didn't even need to cry anymore because I had felt so much better after talking to Professor Hodge. So the following week, that Tuesday, November 7th, 2006, my parents and I took Gus to the vet to be euthanized, and it was really sad and terrible. Gus always really loved adventures, so he was excited to hop in the car to go to the vet, which just killed me. And he was so happy to see all his friends at the vet, and it was really sad. And I was thinking a lot about all the things I'd miss, like feeding him baby carrots and peanut butter. He really loved eating. That was always his thing. And it was really sad and terrible, but I was really grateful that my professors were okay with me missing class to go to be there. And in particular, Professor Hodge was really kind in the following weeks. He always was asking how I was doing, and then he actually started hiring me to dog sit for his dog Lulu while his family was traveling. And I think he legitimately needed a dog sitter, but I also think that he understood that it was really nice to get to spend extra time with the dog when I was missing Gus. So in fall 2021, 15 years later, after Gus's death, I met Professor Hodge for lunch, and by that point, Lulu, who I had taken care of, had also passed away. My childhood dog Gwen had also died. But we spent that whole lunch with our phones out, sharing photos of the dogs we have now. Professor Hodge has Hazel, who is a shiny brown rescue mutt, and I have Seymour, who is a gray Chihuahua pit bull mix with big bat ears. I know, he's really cute, right? One day, all of these dogs are going to be gone too. And that will be sad, but I'm always going to be forever very grateful to my fellow humans who get what it's like to love and lose a pet. Even a decade and a half later, I'm so grateful for how Professor Hodge shared his own story, because it helped me feel better about Gus's death. It helped my own grieving, but it also helped me bring myself closer to a professor who ended up being my major advisor and my mentor. Kindness is the thing that our pets show us every single day. They don't care if we step on their tail by accident or forget to feed them dinner on time. They love us unconditionally. And when a pet you love dies, the thing that you need the most to help you get through that grief is kindness shown to you by a fellow person who really gets it. Which is why I really hope that we can all be more open about sharing our own pet loss stories, because it's the only way that we can really find each other.